Hi, this is Scott Delaney. Today I had the wonderful privilege of interviewing my Aunt Pat Rupli. We talked for a while about family history, and then about halfway through we start talking about her family and her years growing up and the children that she raised with my Uncle Dick Rupli. It was a wonderful experience. I really appreciated the interview, and I hope you'll enjoy it as well.
The Valades was my mother's side of the family, and they were from Canada. And my mother became a citizen after she married my dad and came to this country. So they came to Canada from France, the Valades, in 1650s and settled in just over the border. And
1650s?
1650s. They first came to Montreal, and then they came on toward the area around Windsor. And that's where most of them settled. Most of the ones that stayed were not part of our family that stayed in the early Montreal area. There were many interesting stories because some of them, the Quick family, which was the other side of my mom's family, they came in through the U.S. and they decided they wanted to go around Cincinnati because that was being developed at that time. And I think the land was pretty cheap. They could get a plot of land there, and so they settled there for a while. There were many Indians in that area. And my grandmother always told this story about the children would go out to pick blackberries and so forth that just grew wild, and the Indians sometimes would steal the children. They especially liked the boys, but they would steal all of the children. And they did steal the children of this family. And
the Quicks.
The Quicks.
So, and real quick, the Valade is your...
My grandpa's side, and the Quicks is my grandma's side.
I see. Okay.
So anyway, the kids were doing picking the blackberries, and the Indians got them. I think it was 2 girls and a boy. Well, the girls somehow got away. Of course, they were not as interested in girls, but they captured the boy, and they held him for a very long time. And everybody that was settled there helped to try to find him. But the boy also knew that the family was on their way up to Canada because they did not want to fight against the king. And at that time, it was almost time for the 1812 war. And so they wouldn't fight against the crown. So they were headed to Canada. Well, this boy knew that. So when he couldn't find his family, he started out and he knew where there was a fort up by Detroit. So he headed in that direction, and they were right on his tail all the way.
But the Indians were.
The Indians were, yes.
Yeah.
They weren't giving up.
Did families at that time, do you know if they usually kind of just assumed that the children were lost and dead, or was it assumed that they were in labor? No, they knew that they'd
been captured because they'd taken the girls, and they got the girls back.
Yeah.
So the girls knew that their brother was with these, or that the Indians were after him.
Do you happen to remember what tribe of Indian? No idea.
No, I don't believe they ever did know which tribe it was. But whatever Indians were around Cincinnati at
Pretty
the time.
commonplace for them to catch.
It was common. And anyway, the boy had to be a pretty smart kid because when he got up there, he hid underneath this fort. And when the Indians came to the fort and asked if the people there had seen their boy that got away from them, or that was lost, I think they said he was lost. And of course, they were suspicious right away because they knew what the Indians did. So they said, no, there couldn't be anybody around here because our dogs would bark. Well, the only reason the dog would bark is because the Indians. So when they didn't bark and this boy was hiding under the house because he wasn't an Indian. So after Indians finally gave up and left, the boy came out. And the way they traced the family was that there was a story that they knew of some people that had been hunting and hunting for this boy for a long time. And so they contacted those people. And they said, well, can you give us some indication that this truly is your son? And the mother said yes. He has a big birthmark on his back and told the location of it. And sure enough, he did have that. So he was reunited with his family.
How many miles away, right? That's
Oh,
Cincinnati to Windsor.
yes.
Wow.
Be over 1,000 miles.
That's a hike.
Yes. And he had to swim a lot to get over to the fort in the first place.
Yeah.
But my grandma wrote that story by her own hand and loved telling it.
Wow.
It was something she always told to every grandchild.
Yeah. And that's on the Quick side, and the
Right.
Valades also happen to be.
Well, the Valades, like I say, they came from the Quicks came from England and came in through the U.S. like many of the pilgrims and people did then. But this was Valades were French, so they came over on a boat straight to Canada.
And they also have some history in that same area.
Oh,
in
yes.
Windsor, right.
Yeah. And they stayed there. There are still many Quicks and many Valades in Canada. It's a large, large family on both sides. And I'm constantly seeing more people looking for the family. So I have a lot in my ancestry tally now of people, Quicks and Valades, that are looking for their relatives.
Wow.
So,
Very cool.
but I say they were prominent people for all that time in Canada. You can't go very far without hearing that name.
Right. Right. And even to this day, there's some remnants of the business history with the Valades, if I understand correctly.
Oh, well, this was much later because it would have been when my mother was a young woman. Her uncles, her father stayed to take care of the farm. And the boys, I think there were 6 of them, went to Detroit, crossed the river and went to Detroit and started a meat packing business down at Eastern Market in Detroit.
Okay.
And they developed a way to keep meat cold because that was a big problem then. Right. And so after they did that, they earned a lot of money and started a new business there. And I remember the one year they all had 1916 automobiles and they all bought the same car. And I have a picture of that that's very interesting with them all. But my grandpa wasn't one of those. He was back at the farm, which was not making any money. And he did not have a new car.
Yeah.
But they always supported him, and they started having family reunions. And it was very important to these boys, all these boys, to keep the family together. So even after their dad died, they still continued, and they continued on to the reunions. I used to be in charge of them sometimes, and so it's continued until probably almost 1980, I would say, at least. And now it's kind of disappeared because so many of the people have moved from the area. And if the children don't keep it up, then those kind of things stop happening.
Right, right. Well, since the 80s, and were there any, and the Valades came to this hemisphere in the 1600s, is that right?
Yes, 1600s, about the 1650s.
Wow.
And now the Kane family, which was my father's side, they also came to this country, but they came from Ireland. And we know it was, I have found John Kane, but it was spelled Kain rather than the C, which was very often what happened. Names would change. Sometimes it would happen when they immigrated because the people would make a mistake and write it wrong, and it just stayed that way. So anyway, we have found John Kane. There is a monument for him because he was here prior to the Revolutionary War, and he fought in the war. So in Pennsylvania, we have found a monument, and we have pictures of it.
Wow.
That were because he was part of the war.
Wow.
And our fighting family goes on because many generations later, my great-grandfather fought in the Civil War. And my grandfather used to talk about his dad a lot. And I wish I'd asked more questions then than
Yeah.
I did.
Well, you don't think about it when you're a kid.
No, you don't. But my dad was very interested in all that, and he loved that grandpa. It was his grandpa. And he was a pallbearer when that grandpa died. And he did have a military burial, and he's buried down in Deschler, Ohio. And we've been there many times. We always take flowers and things, so we still go to where he is buried. But he was a volunteer, he and his brother, and they lived at the time in Beaver, Pennsylvania, which is south of Pittsburgh. And there were many, many guys that volunteered, of course, for the North. And they all got on a train and headed toward Washington, D.C. That's where the headquarters were, and that's where they were going to be assigned what they were going to do. And this group stayed together, and they were in most of the big battles. They were at Gettysburg, and the brother that was with him was wounded at Gettysburg, and quite severely in his leg. So he was left there at a hospital in D.C. While the rest of the gang went on. And they were around Washington, D.C. for quite a while because it took the troops a long time to get their act together. And when they finally did, the next thing, the big one was Gettysburg. And it was interesting because the people in Washington at that time thought the war was like fun, and they used to go out to watch the battles. So pretty soon, though, it wasn't much fun because they were losing a lot of people, and there were many people that... And my grandfather, not at the beginning of the war, but toward the middle, he started a diary, and my brother still has that diary, and we've made many, many copies. So we have firsthand information about what was going on in the troop that he was in. Wow. And these were all volunteers.
And what's great-grandfather's name?
William Washington Cain.
Gotcha.
And at that time, of course, Cain was C-A-I-N. And so we know a lot about him because my grandfather knew a lot about him. And when we were youngsters, my dad took us all to Gettysburg because we knew that their name was on a monument because my grandpa knew a lot about it. And when we got there, my dad said, well, let's hire a guide so we'll make sure we get everything. Well, after we had the guide for a while, we realized that my grandfather knew more than the guide because he'd been there many times before and knew every detail. He knew exactly how the battles were fought. And of course, his dad had written all this down in the diary. So we had it all to look at now, too. And you can still see exactly what was happening. And some of the awful things that these guys did, they slept out in mud and freezing cold, or it was hot. And a lot of them, of course, got wounded and killed from fighting. But they also died from dysentery many, many times. There were always epidemics that went through the troops. And so we lost many, many. But W.W., or William Washington, was lucky that he didn't encounter anything that bad. However, he did get sick, and he had measles, which gave him a deafness in one ear, and it affected his eyesight. So many things like that happened because these camps, would just be laying out. They wouldn't have cover of any sort, and they wouldn't have much food. They'd be so happy to have really bad coffee or just anything to eat. Hardtack is what they...
I'm thinking about a couple of different things right now. When reading the diary, did you ever get any inclination as to like WW's motivation for volunteering and joining the war? Did they ever talk about why he or his fellow troops were there?
Well, at the beginning, the reason they volunteered is because of the, I guess they had a big party. Well, not a party, but they were trying to enlist people as volunteers. So they, of course, he and his brother knew that if they went up there, they would get a good dinner and that, they would have a lot of things given to them. So they just thought it was going to be fun to go and see what was happening. Well, when they got up there and this guy was talking to them, I think it made them realize what was going to happen. And and how bad this was going to get. So they, of course, were against slavery. So they wanted to volunteer and felt that it was a good cause. And many, many, many guys that very day went and volunteered to go with the troop that they were just forming. And they would pick guys up then as the railroad would go, or rail car would go along in different places, because it had happened in more than just around Pittsburgh. But Pittsburgh had so many people that volunteered that that's where the troop started.
Wow. It's interesting to juxtapose the willingness of people to first show up for a warm meal and an interest, back in those days they weren't turning into TV and watching the news. So if you wanted the news, you had to be a part of the community. And if you wanted, you follow the hot meal to see what's going on. But it just for me instills a lot of gratitude and thinking about once these folks who understood the gravity and the consequence of their situation and knew what could possibly be the result in fighting against slavery, that they're willing to get trench foot and dysentery and I don't know if they would have ever imagined that that WW would get the measles and go half blind and half deaf, but it's just, it makes me reconsider some thoughts about being willing to have, allowing the Union to dissolve a little bit, because you look at some irreconcilable differences that I feel like people have now and realize that's nothing compared to what was happening during the Civil War, So just I wanted to interject with those two thoughts, understand people's motivation, and then, look at where we are now, and it's nice to be standing on the shoulders of those giants. But I'll let you get back to talking about...
Well, I know that a lot of people volunteered that day because in my grandpa's diary, he talks about these other people, and some of them had the same last name, so I'm assuming that they were cousins or some kind of a relative. Wow. But he also talks about many other guys that he knew from his area in Pennsylvania that all went that day, and they all volunteered. So I think it was pretty widespread that nobody was in favor of slavery in that area. They all wanted to do away with it. And when they got to Washington, of course, they met more people. They met blacks there, and they had been fighting against it for a long time. And there were a lot of people that came and helped. It wasn't just a few.
Right.
And it wasn't just their family.
Well, that's really cool. Amen.
Amen is right. And the hardships that they had to endure through all this, people didn't quit. They just kept going. And when I read his diary and see how tough it was, it's a wonder that they stayed. But they were certainly committed. And he talks about the generals that took over, because they had many different people that were in charge of their group. And it's a wonder that they didn't leave, because conditions were so bad, and they really weren't getting very far at the beginning of that war.
Sure.
It was really tough.
Yeah.
And that as that war went on, of course, they started to win more battles. When they got to Gettysburg, they were there, and that's when that brother was wounded and had to he had to be in the hospital then most of the rest of the time. He didn't rejoin the group until they were headed home. But anyway, they were in many battles all the way, and things, of course, were not going well all the time either. And this grandfather always talked about how wonderful the leaders were. He always had great respect for the people that were trying to do this. And he finally was in the Battle of the Wilderness, which is more toward the end of the war, but still there was plenty of battle after that. But he was wounded there in his arm, and pretty much his right arm was incapacitated for the rest of his life. Wow. And later in life, he did get some kind of a stipend for the wound. However, in today's world, people would think, oh my goodness, is that all they gave these guys that lost a limb or whatever? And
yeah. He just he had to keep pressing on either way.
Right.
Yeah.
And they didn't think of running home.
So he survived the war.
He did survive the
Your
war,
grandpa knew him well.
and my dad knew him very well. Wow. And he was a pallbearer at his funeral.
Yep.
So, and he loved him. You could just tell the way he talked about him. How
Did you get to
much
know
respect?
Your grandpa?
My own grandfather was a wonderful man, and he loved all his grandkids. I mean, he just used to love to tell you the stories. And he loved Abraham Lincoln, and I think W.W. also loved Abraham Lincoln. And he was like a hero to them at the time.
Yeah.
And so I remember my cousin bought Grandpa a statue, a head of Abraham Lincoln, and he had it in his house always. Because he loved that man so much because of what he was doing.
Is that still floating around the family anywhere?
I'm sure that my cousin has that. After Grandpa died, I'm sure she took it home with her.
Good.
Mm-hmm.
The So tell me about your father and your mother.
Well, I've said that my mother came from Canada, and my dad's family had been from Deschler, Ohio. However, it was during farming was pretty good in those days. And in Canada, the farmland was cheaper, and there was a lot of farming going on. And my dad decided that maybe they could make some money if they went over there and bought a farm, and he would run it. Now, my grandfather had been running like a store for farmers that they would come in and get their supplies. He didn't actually have a farm himself at that time, but he had like this store where the farmers came in to get their supplies.
Okay. And this is Grandpa
This is,
Kane?
yes,
Okay.
O.M.
O.M.
Or, his first name was Orr. And that odd name came to him because he was the last one in the family, and I guess his mother ran out of names, and she named him after the doctor that birthed him.
Oh.
I turned it off.
That's fine. His name was Orr, after the doctor that
After the
delivered him.
doctor that birthed him, right.
Not Orr like, I think this is the last one, or...
No, well, I'm sure that lady probably hoped it was because there were 8 children in the family already.
Whoa.
But
That's why you run out of names.
But yes, but my grandpa loved his family and he loved his mother. He talked about her like she was a sainted lady. He just really loved her. And she was Scottish. And when I often wondered why so many of these Canes married these Scotch people. And when I looked it up on a map, I found out that where they originally came from up in Ireland was in the northern part. And they could take a little boat and be across there to Scotland in a very short time. So they met those Scotch ladies and married them.
Something
So
reminded him of home.
I think Scotch ladies were a favorite of this family.
Well, now it's, yeah. Well, yeah, many Nordic wives among the males in our family, too.
Right. That's right. Yeah.
So that would be your grandfather ran the store, and
then my dad decided that, or said, maybe I could go and start a farm over there because they're selling the land cheap and it's good farmland because it's near Lake Erie.
Yeah.
So he went over and bought a farm, and of course, he was there by himself, and it was really tough.
Now think of what it would be like in those days. Where are we at in the years here? That would be
Well, they did have cars, but they were the old Model T kind.
so early 1900s.
Yes.
And
Well, my
there's
dad was
no-
born in '02.
Okay.
So he would have been, I believe he was 18 when my grandpa died.
Yeah.
I mean, my great grandpa died.
It's so I do know a bit about farming. I like growing food, and so thinking about that, how you get the information that there's, that northern shore of Lake Erie. This is very unique kind of climate condition, unique soil, and it's an incredible farmland.
It's good farmland.
But it must have been really an act of faith to go, I've read it here, I've heard it here, we're going to go. Because it's not like you could look up on Google Maps and go,
Right.
look at how green that is up there.
Right.
Let's go. Or you don't have average, it's harder to come by that data that would help you make that kind of information, that decision.
Yeah.
That's, I like kind of understanding people's motivations, like that's not an easy thing to do to move up there.
Well, I think he got it going, and then the whole family moved over there. However, there was one bad thing that happened, and it was called the Depression.
Right.
And then they realized that their farm was not going to make it because there were so many farms that were well along and they were new.
Right.
So when they decided they weren't going to be able to do that because the whole family was there by then, and my grandma had 2 more kids over there. So they needed money. And that's when my dad decided that somebody must have offered him a job in a printing shop in Detroit. So he started going back and forth from the farm into Detroit, and he became a typesetter. I don't know what encouraged him to become in the printing business. I never exactly knew, but it had to be someone that he knew that helped him find this job.
Just an opportunity that
Right.
came his way. And this is Grandpa Wilbur.
Yes, this is my father.
Okay.
And so it wasn't too long after that. He had met my mother by then, but they weren't married then. And then as time went on, they decided to get married, and they were going to move back to Toledo, which was not too far from Deschler, of course, where they started out. And so they sold what they could of the farm, and then they all moved back. And my dad by then had married my mother, so she came with them. And they all moved to Toledo, and they lived together in a duplex house in downtown Toledo. And that's where I was born when we lived in that duplex.
Wow.
And
in Toledo Hospital?
there was no hospital at that time.
You weren't born in the
No,
hospital?
the doctor just came to the house.
All right.
Yeah.
Because I know it's getting close to the time where people did start.
Yeah. Oh, yes, because my sister and I were born at home, and then my 2 brothers were born in the hospital.
And what year were you born?
35.
All right.
Now, that was time of full depression. And so nobody had anything. So it wasn't like we were the only ones. It was like nobody had it. But my uncle, my dad's brother, happened to have an envelope business going in Toledo, and I think that's what brought them to Toledo in the first place. So my dad started working for him, selling envelopes. And of course, he learned a bit about the printing because people usually want their envelopes imprinted. So I think that's how it began. And even at one time, my mom was the person that answered the phone at the envelope business. So that's what they were doing. But of course, bread was only a nickel a loaf then, too. But people did not have much money. And if you earned 25 cents a week, that's what you had to live on. So the Depression was very, very bad
Yeah.
for everyone.
And it lasted longer than people think.
It did. It lasted, well, I think it started early 30s, and it didn't really end fully until we got toward the Second World War,
Yeah.
when the economy finally
Even
came back.
into the Second World War.
Right.
We jump in 1939.
Yeah,
So that's
right.
a long depression.
It was a long haul. Also, the other bad thing that happened is the drought out in the farmland. And so there were no crops. It was the Dust Bowl.
Yep.
And so they couldn't grow things. There were many bad things that happened all during that time. And of course, then I believe it was when Roosevelt came in as president that he started those jobs for people where the government was hiring you to work on dams and
Right.
bridges and so forth. So they got people put back to work. But I do remember what our house was like. I have good memory. Even when I'm 3, I do remember
Oh, you don't
things.
say.
And
Good memory. You're rattling all this off without.
I do have a good memory. And a lot of people, I'm always astounded when the boys say, I don't remember that. But I do.
Yeah.
And we had a little teeny house, and you never know your house isn't big when you're little. So it looked okay to me.
Right.
I was getting fed every day, but 3 of us were born at that house. And but by that time, my dad had decided that the only way he was going to make money was to get out on his own. So he started a printing business. He borrowed some money on an insurance policy, a life insurance that my mother had. And he was able to buy 1 press. So he rented one
Let's
room.
say that's two birds with one stone, because if you borrow on the insurance policy, your wife doesn't want to kill you when you try to start a new business because she won't
No,
get anything for it.
no. My mother
Survival.
was all in for starting the business.
That's awesome.
And anyway, he would sell a job, and then he would come back and print it. And at that time, the printing thing, it was a foot lever, so it wasn't electric even. But he would sell that job, and then he would take it and get the money for that, and then he could get another job. And he just kept going like that until he was doing better. And then things started to pick up, and he was able to get other machinery. And by the time I was old enough to really go down to this printing company, he had quite a few employees. But it really took off when the war started, because just prior to the war, all the businesses, the big manufacturing companies, switched over to building things for the war effort. And of course, Willys Overland started making the Jeeps in Toledo,
Yep.
and that was a big business. But everybody that had been doing something else then turned to war effort. And it wasn't like today. Everybody was in. We had rationing stamps, so you only got so much gas for your car.
Wow.
You could only have so much meat per month, and it depended on how many people were in your family. So there was a lot of rationing, and we were all saving our tin cans. We were saving grease. You can't believe the things that we could turn in, and they'd maybe give you an extra stamp or something if you brought a lot of things for the war effort.
Wow.
But we were all in. It wasn't like now, where some people were in and some people weren't. They were all in, and everybody did their very best. And of course, we would have, I started school during that time, and so I was in school during the whole war. And at school, we of course, we knew all about it, and we would have air raids, and we'd have to go to the basement of the school and lean up against the wall and crouch down. And even at our houses, we would have air raids at night, and that meant every light in your house had to be out, and there would be an air raid warden that would come around and make sure that no light was shining anywhere in your house, because if aircraft came over, they would spot it. So, but everybody was in favor. If you went to the movies then, if you could afford it, of course it was only 10 cents or 12 cents maybe. And at the beginning of the movie, we would hear what was going on in the war, because we only had a radio at our house. We didn't have any up-to-date stuff. And my dad would sit there with his ear up to the radio every night at 6 o'clock to get all the latest news. And that's the only news we got. Otherwise wouldn't know what was going on. But when you went to the movie or someplace like that, the first thing you would see is a newsreel, because they could show more of our troops. And of course, they mostly showed us succeeding. They wanted to show the good parts.
Yeah, yeah.
And everybody would stand and salute, and we would sing the Star Spangled Banner and salute the flag, pledge the flag. And so it was just one single effort throughout the entire country. Now, some people talk about putting the Japanese in internment camps. Well, you have to understand, at that time, people that spoke German and that were different, we were afraid because of what they were doing to us. And so there was a lot of fear. And I think rather than people being nasty, because I know we had a German family, and some people were nasty to those people, even though they'd been here quite a while. So I think maybe they were better off in those camps because they were with all their friends and family, and than having them out where people could be nasty to them. But we were fearful. We didn't know when a bomb might drop on our house. We just had no idea. And we didn't have the up-to-date news like we hear today. There was once a day you got a little something going on. But songs were penned for people to sing about the troops coming home, and everybody was into the effort. We saved everything we could. We did everything we could. And then finally we had VJ Day. And we had the victory in Europe, and then we had victory over Japan, and then we got back. And then, of course, our country started doing really well. And the kids got back to regular school, and things got better.
Right. What are some of like the specific memories of your childhood? You said duplex downtown. Did you guys stay there for a long time?
We stayed there for just a few years. I was born at that house. But then we bought this small house that was just for our family. And like I say, it was a very small house now that I look back. And I think our bathroom was in the basement. I mean, it was very small, but it was what we could afford when my dad had just started a business.
And do you remember what part of town that was in?
Yes, it was in the West Toledo.
Okay.
Westbrook Drive. But it's off Douglas Road.
Wow.
Yeah. And then finally, 3 of us were born there. And when they found out, I guess, they didn't tell us, but I assume when thought my brother was going to be born, my younger brother, that's when we bought the bigger house on Lasky Road. and then that's where we planted. Well, the war was still going on when we did that move, because we grew huge victory gardens. And my dad bought the lots that were next to our house so that we could plant even a bigger garden, and we would grow enough corn, tomatoes, all those things that we could share too. Because we used to get our wagon and load it up and give it to the neighbors.
And that was Lasky Road?
Right. That was on Lasky Road.
That was the original
and
mobile.
we lived there all through grade school, high school, all 4 of us. In fact, one day when Bill finally went to school, they said, "Another Kane? Are there any more of you at home?" And he said, "No, I'm the last one."
And who are your siblings?
My siblings are Carol, who was my sister, about not quite 2 years younger, and then my brother, who was 3 years younger, and then my younger brother, who was 6 years younger.
You got to get.
And there's
assume who's listening doesn't know the names.
Okay. My name is Patricia.
You're the oldest.
My sister's name is Carol.
Yep.
My brother's name was Daniel. Mm-hmm. And my youngest brother is William.
And
named
Daniel
after William Washington.
Mm-hmm. And Daniel is my grandfather.
And Daniel is, yes.
So we're kind of, I'm trying to stitch it together.
Mm-hmm. I was in charge of the gang, and it was fun being in charge of the gang, but they were a good gang. Yeah. So we had lots of fun. Our parents were pretty lenient about what we were able to do, and they would get swing sets and things for us. So things improved as far as economy went, and my dad's business took off. But it certainly wasn't all great at the beginning. I remember him cutting a cardboard cereal box up to put in his shoe because he couldn't afford to have them resold. But the printing business boomed, and it became a very large firm in Toledo, industrial printing.
So when did you notice that your family was starting to shift from, like you said, you don't notice you're in a small house when you're a kid, but when did you start to realize, we're doing well?
I knew we had a bigger house because it had an upstairs, and we slept upstairs then. So we knew it was bigger. But, most of the houses around us weren't that much smaller. So I just thought everybody was the same as we were. Mm-hmm. I think as a kid, you don't notice a lot of that, and it doesn't matter.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
What was you went to Whitmer?
I went to Warren Grade School. And the funny part about that is that your grandpa also went to Warren Grade School because they moved to a house after they were married where the kids went to the same grade school as he had. And so they went there for several years. I think Larry, they were there quite a while.
They would have been there for a while,
Mm-hmm. until they moved to Sylvania.
yeah, until they moved to Sylvania.
Yeah.
Right. So that would have been up until My mom was in high school, I think. So
Right.
yeah,
So those kids actually went to the same school, which wouldn't be happening much today probably. But people
Right.
stayed in the same place for a long time then, and we never wanted to move. We liked being there. We knew all the people. It was a very friendly area, and everybody knew everyone and helped everyone. We had to walk down Lasky Road, which was very busy, and I took school. And I remember neighbors that would bring Carol and I in when it was a terrible rainstorm when we were trying to get home.
Wow.
Things were very friendly then,
Yeah.
and you didn't have to worry about somebody that might hurt them.
Yeah, because you had more neighbors looking out.
Right.
And
They
you
were
weren't
looking
getting
out for everybody.
people weren't getting kidnapped by Indians on a regular
No,
basis.
they were not.
Or
But nothing
couple
like
hundred
that
years
was
past then.
happening. We
Yeah.
didn't even hear about those things then.
Well, that's a totally different generation.
Right.
The what was Whitmer like? What was your experience in high school?
Well,
And where'd you meet Dick?
oh, that's later.
That's later.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anyway, yes, Whitmer was a very small high school, very small, but I loved it. And it was well built and it was good. And we did have football team and basketball teams and all that. And of course, I met more people as you go to a high school because they're coming from other elementaries. So your world expands with more people in it. And then after high school, which the kids all finished at the same high school, and I went on to college at the University of Toledo.
And what year did you graduate?
I graduated in 57.
Okay.
Oh, from high school or college?
Well, I guess you just answered both questions.
Well,
High school would
53
be
from
50.
high school
Okay.
and 57 from college.
Great.
Now that, and of course the kids were following along and doing their thing too, and we all graduated from that same high school. Then that is where I met Dick. However, I
college?
wouldn't have met him because he would have been through college except for the Korean War. And he had gone to school, I believe, only 1 year, and he knew he was going to get drafted, so he went and enlisted, and he was in the Air Force for 4 years. So he went to England and France and Germany, and then came back home and came back to the university, and that's when I met him. I
Wow.
think I was a junior by then. And of course, he had just as much schooling to go as I did because he hadn't accomplished any more than I think a year or so when he went
got put on
to
pause.
service. And of course, that's when you were drafted. And today, that's not even something that can happen.
So what did Uncle Dick study? And did he's not here to share any
Right.
of his story, unfortunately.
Right. Well, I was only in elementary education because I was going to be a teacher.
I see.
So that's what I was doing. And when I met Dick, it was because we were having a fraternity party, or they were having my sorority for a party.
Okay.
And so he came up to me because I'd had mono. And so he came up to me, he said, "Are you the girl that had mono? My sister-in-law has that, and I want to know something about it." So that
That
I said,
sounds the
"That's a
same."
weird line. I haven't heard that one before." But
Could just that requires no imagination to think of him saying that.
Right.
That sounds like
yeah.
that's what he would say.
Really? Yeah. But anyway, we just started to date and didn't think too much of it. But as time dwindled down to where we weren't going to be seeing each other anymore, he just came over one night and said, "Let's get married." He was going to California. And I don't think he really wanted to go alone. But his sister lived out there, and he was headed out there, and he didn't even have a job. He just knew he'd be able to get one because he was an engineer, and he'd had, at that time, engineers were not a dime a dozen. They were very few. And he had, the qualifications to find a job, especially in California where so much of the technology was being developed.
And what year was that?
And that was 57.
Okay.
Right after we graduated.
Wow.
And so we left for California then, and we stayed with his sister for a while, and I got a teaching job after he found his job. And he worked for Westinghouse on submarines where they were developing launchers for missiles.
Wow.
That was the beginning.
I bet he's got there's probably some things he worked on that he wasn't allowed to talk about.
Probably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what was did he share with you much about his military experience?
Well, yes, he told me all about it, but he said he was one of the lucky ones. He never got to Korea. When you go in, they test you, and he got put in this unit where they sent secret messages. So he was always at a headquarters
Okay.
in these locations.
I see.
And he had to have high clearance for his job.
So he dealt more in intelligence
Right.
and communications. Interesting. That makes sense.
Well, he felt very lucky because he knew a lot of guys that had to go on to Korea. So.
Yeah.
And then after we missed our families too much and moved back to Toledo.
How long were you in California?
We were just there a little over a year.
Okay.
But we did enjoy it while we were there. It was a lot of fun and very different from Toledo, Ohio,
Even then, yeah.
even then. But it wasn't like today at all. It was just being developed.
Right.
And we were in Silicon Valley. We were in Sunnyvale. So that's where a lot of things were happening at the time. So he probably would have gotten caught up in a lot of that had we stayed there.
Right.
But he came back, and I was working, and he was working, and he went back to the university, and I think he ended up getting about 3 more master's degrees, and so that created some of the jobs.
All
So-
related to engineering?
Right.
Yeah.
And then we had 3 kids, Tim and Susan and Bob. And they were all adopted children because I think that's what the Lord had in mind for us, because I lost a few, and we said, we just want kids. So that was that.
Hey, you get to share love. And when
Right.
you're a cup running over, it's nice to just have
Right.
someone else there to catch it.
And that has worked out better than we ever thought.
Amen.
So,
Cool.
and of course we lost Dick and we've lost Bob,
Yeah.
which is sad for me and all of us. But we've got grandchildren that help take care of us nowadays, keep
Yeah.
us going,
Good.
and many friends, of course, that when someone dies, you find out how many friends you didn't even think about you had, and relatives, and yeah. But
Yeah.
I loved my job, teaching. And then I went back and got a master's degree after we moved up to around Detroit. Dick took a job up that area, so our whole family moved. So our kids went to West Bloomfield schools, and that's where I worked. And I got a master's degree in library science, and so then I became the librarian,
From what
media
school?
consultant,
What
Wayne State.
Okay.
And so I moved from the classroom into the library. And at that time, technology was just beginning because I had computers that were brought into my library. And I said, what do you want me to do with those? And they said, well, we want you to teach the kids how to use those. And the first thing I found out is the way you got the information is in there, other than typing it, was by a cassette tape. You put the cassette in there,
What year was this?
and it took 3 minutes to load it. And that was in, let me think, early 1900s. I mean, early 90s.
Early
90s,
90s, yeah.
Yeah. We had them in there by, I'd say, 93 or so.
Wow.
Maybe they started bringing them in. And we only had a few right in the library at the beginning. So then the classes would come in. Well, they soon saw that that was going to be the way education was going to go. So we started having labs with many computers in them. And of course, the computers became different immediately. And
Oh, yeah.
it became a method of teaching. But at the beginning, they just came to me, and, that was the start of it. And then I wasn't all in favor at first because I could see where this was going. Because after my library became automated, which scared me to death because I was afraid to let go of my catalog, because I thought they were going to lose all this and I wouldn't know what I had. So my catalog got hidden in my office because I was so sure that thing was going to fail. But anyway, it didn't. It didn't fail. However, I could see the good in it when I had to do inventory because that took me way less time. But I also saw the things that were going to come of it, because we had a fourth grader that erased our encyclopedia. And I thought, well, if a fourth grader can do that, what can anybody do that wants to do that sort of thing?
We could get rid of a whole history.
You could get rid of secrets. You could,
Yeah.
all you'd have to do is break in. You can do whatever.
That's why we
And he was only in fourth grade, breaking in.
got books here. Wow. Yeah.
That's why I wouldn't let go of my card catalog.
That's the backup plan. That's your backup drive.
That was my backup, right. I'd done it that way forever, and I knew it was tried and true.
Yep. So how long did you work?
Then our kids, of course, went on to school afterwards. They went to college.
Did you work while you were bringing up the kids at the same time?
No, I stayed home with the children until they were in middle school.
Okay.
Or high school by then. And after they all were back in school, then that's when I went and I was on my way of getting a master's degree when they were still in school. But then to get a job, I waited till they were old enough to get themselves organized a little better.
Yeah.
Right. So anyway, it turned out good because I got to know a lot about their district that they were in, and got to know all the people there. And then finally, after the kids were out of school, and it was time for us to retire, we said, what do we want to do? Because that's something you have to think about for a long time. And we decided that we would come to this lake for our summer home, and we came over and bought this cottage. And then I think Dick and I had the most fun probably of our whole time building this house. Because it was just every day, all day long. And everybody would come up and say, oh my gosh, what are you doing? Especially your grandpa.
Get someone else to do that.
He thought we'd lost our minds when he saw the whole back end open. And he said, well, how do I get in here? And I said, up this ramp.
And so when did you build this place?
And we started it in 90. We put the furnace in 96 and mostly built it with the porch and all. 97, probably spilled it a little bit into 98.
Great.
And we were ready to roll. And after that, we just started having the cane reunions right here.
Yeah.
And every year we came here until we finally had 100 people. And that was about all our yard could hold. But it was wonderful. And I have all the pictures of every year.
I remember it dearly. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think reunions are such a good thing for families because you don't forget them. And if you do, you see the pictures and then it brings it back.
They're vivid memories and a multi-sensory experience from the deviled eggs to the boat rides, you know, everything.
Yeah.
You know,
we started getting boats, you know, you had to have fish and then you had to have rides.
I remember the paddle boats.
Oh, yes. And then actually the first year we had the reunion, everybody chipped in and bought us a paddle boat. And of course, your feet make it go.
Yep.
So we've got pictures of Dick and I in our pedal boat. And the one that liked it most was the dog we had then. If I didn't take him for a ride every day, he wouldn't leave me alone.
Let's get back to your kids.
Okay.
Let's talk about what were they like when they were coming up, you know, up to age 10, you know, because I know I have kids, they change a lot. And if, you know, from 1 to 4 is a totally different thing. From 4 to 8 is different.
Right.
And then they start trying to become adults after that point.
Right. Well, when we first moved up to West Bloomfield, we had a nice 2-story home and everything, and it was full of kids. When we were looking for the house, I said to Dick, if there are no children in the neighborhood, we won't look here because we're going to have lots of kids because Susan wanted lots of girlfriends. So we looked and we went through this one and I said, okay, this is it. Tell the real estate lady to find us a place here. So she did. And they had many, many friends in that neighborhood. It was good for all of them because I remember Susan coming home after we started unloading the truck of our stuff and said, I've already been invited for lunch. So we knew we were in the right place.
Oh,
And the
cool.
kids all graduated from West Bloomfield. And so they all went to the same schools. They did not have to take a bus. They could walk to all the schools. So we really liked that. And we met many wonderful people there, and we had a wonderful church, which was always important to us. We'd had a church when we lived down near Toledo that we attended, and then that was the first thing we did. And I said to Dick, we're not going to go to a church now where it's not built, because we just went through that, and we want to go to a church that's built. So what happens? The church is meeting in our school at the end of our road. I said, oh, well, we might as well go and try it out. So we helped build that church too.
Wow.
But we loved it.
Cool.
And we were there with the kids, and they all got confirmed and everything from that church.
Is it still meeting today?
It still is going today.
Great.
And when we were having the problems with Dick and Bob, that pastor was still living. I don't know if he still is, but he was living, and he called me.
And
of
what's
course,
what's that
remembered
church?
Lutheran Church. Oh, wait a minute. I've got to get the right Lutheran Church, because we go to the one here that's the Lakes. It was Holy Spirit Lutheran Church.
Okay.
And
what
he was a wonderful pastor.
Wow.
And he'd retired, actually, but he had confirmed all of our kids, so he felt very close to all of us.
That's what's the pastor's name?
John Freed.
Okay. And so fun kids in the neighborhood, plenty of friends around. How about a
then-
short story from each, like a special memory from each one of your children, preferably something maybe moderately embarrassing.
Well, I always think about Bob, because he couldn't wait to just get out and play with friends. That was the way he was.
Yeah.
But then he and another guy got to be pretty good friends, and they were both good baseball players. So the dads had to be the team.
The coaches?
Coaches. Yeah. And so Bob played Little League ball until he was about 13, I think. And then he didn't grow, and all the other kids did. And he kind of went, because I really thought he'd always stay with it. But he had many years of it, and we could never go on vacation because he was always on the All-Stars. So we had to stay home until that was over. And then the other two would complain, we always have to stay home because Bob has to play. But,
Did he grow pretty early then? Was it?
Well, what happened was, of course, same thing that had happened to Dick. When Dick was young, he left school being one of the shortest guys in the summer, and then went back in the fall, and he was one of the tallest guys. He grew 6 inches in one summer. And that's just about what happened to Bob. He was in high school already, and he was short, and all of a sudden he grew, and then he was 6 feet tall.
Wow.
And we had moved to a lake that was up by where we lived, because there were many, many lakes in that area. It was a whole chain of lakes, and the kids always wanted to move. So then we had boats there, and they all learned to be great skiers. They loved doing that.
Oh,
and
yeah.
Did all kinds of things in the water, and of course they always had their friends over doing that. In the winter, the lake would freeze over, and we'd all, not only sled, but we all skied. So we would do cross-country skiing. And since it wasn't far to the slopes, our kids all learned to do downhill skiing.
Oh, wow.
And we would do that many times on holidays, vacations. We'd go up north and ski. So that was one of our family things that we did many years, sometimes with other families. But
That's great.
that was a big thing. Between the lake in the summer and the skiing in the winter was pretty much what we did with the kids.
And no big injuries while downhill skiing?
Oh, well, the only person that really got injured was Bob, because he knew no bounds. He just would take a chance on everything. So Bob had broken many things in his life or had many mishaps. So one time, Tim was already at Hillsdale College, and he'd gotten hurt. He told me playing lacrosse. We'll leave it at that.
Yeah.
And so he had broken his ankle. And Bob had also done something and broken, I don't know if it was his ankle or what. So when I had to go to the hospital with these two to get the casts off, the people came out to look and see what size I was, that I had two kids already with breaks that were in casts. And I guess they saw when I was 5 feet tall and not very big that I must not have caused these. I always thought, why are they staring at
They were
me?
suspicious.
But yeah, so Bob was our guy to get injuries a lot. But well, one time I do remember, and we always had cousins that came and stayed with us.
Oh, yeah.
Of course, you weren't heard of yet, but they used to call up and ask to have baby Bobby come and stay overnight, those girls. And so baby Bobby would go spend the night over there.
I heard he was a little
But we were-
celebrity at that time.
He was a celebrity at that time. And but it was like that always. We always traded kids in the summer or on vacations because they always wanted to go see their cousins and stay. So
Yep.
your grandma and I would meet in Ann Arbor and trade kids a lot.
That's great. And they all love each other
Oh, they do. They still.
dearly.
Oh, they can't go without talking on the phone.
Yeah.
It's remained that way.
That's
And the
special.
ones that were closest in age stayed that way, like Beth and Susan.
Yeah.
They just stayed like that. And even with the boys too, it's always just remained
Yeah.
a close bond. And I think because we always did fun things, we didn't let anything go by without celebrating. Birthdays, Christmases, our family got together, and
Yeah.
when the weddings started, the graduations, then the weddings, the
yeah.
babies. I can't tell you the number of showers and things we planned and had. And
You've seen a lot of them.
I've seen a lot of them. Yes, when
yeah.
I remember one time somebody called and Larry picked up the phone and I forget what the person wanted to know, and they said, "Well, you'll have to call Aunt Pat. She's the one that knows all this stuff." So I guess I got the job.
Addresses, birthdays. Yeah, you never quit the business of library science.
Right. Well, either that or it was the printing in my head.
Yeah.
And of course, I didn't mention that I had also worked at the printing company.
right.
Because at that time, everybody worked at the printing company for a while.
Yeah.
So I started out in the bindery. And I do remember when Dad first started and there'd be jobs that needed to get done quick, he would bring them home and we'd all help. That was, more at the beginning and probably during the war more.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. But I worked my way up to the office because then I learned how to type and take shorthand and all those things and file.
What great skills to be developing at that time, too.
They were very good, and I was very glad because I could really type well then, and that was good for computers too,
Yeah.
and my job.
How about like some holiday memories with you and your kids, and then the extended
Well, I'll
family?
tell you about one of the. Usually, we got together with the whole gang at least once during the holidays, and we decided that you kids were getting off too scot-free. Excuse me for saying Scott, but
That's a
anyway,
nickname of
we
mine.
decided that you were getting off free, and that you should be entertaining us for getting all these gifts from everyone.
Right.
So we said, okay, you have to stand up and entertain us before you get your gift. And I do have pictures of you guys standing up, and I don't know if you were reciting or singing or whatever it was, but then you'd get your gift. And we got pictures of that.
That's great.
I think we even started that before my mom and dad died.
Really?
Now, my mom and dad, that we've talked about already, adored every single grandchild that came along. They were everyone was special. And when they both died a week apart, it was really tough, but our kids were all still quite young. In fact, my youngest brother's kids were really babies. They couldn't even come to it. They didn't have memory of them. But Larry was the oldest, and I think he was 16 and able to drive. And we let Larry be in charge of the whole gang of kids. And I recently talked to him about it. I said, I can't believe that all we grown-ups gave Larry the responsibility of corralling all those children.
And they survived.
And they survived. He drove them in the car. I'm not sure we'd do that today.
You probably, someone would call
But
you in.
they all lived through it, so I guess
Yeah.
it wasn't so bad.
That's good.
after all. But
And it was your, we didn't talk about Annie, Grandma
okay.
Ann
Oh, we didn't. We just talked about
Wilbur.
where she came from.
Right, right. So
Okay.
what was your mother? I'm sorry to rewind again.
Annie, my mother, that was from Canada, was probably the sweetest person you could ever meet. She she never talked again. She was a very Christian woman, and she had been brought up that way. My relatives in Canada were all very Christian people. It was just part of their life. It was the way they were. They were brought up that way, and they were all alike. And anyway, Annie was like that, and everybody that met her liked her because if she didn't like someone, you wouldn't know it. If there was something.
Yeah.
And the thing I remember about my mother went from the time I was very little. She would get up in the morning and go at her work, and I think she loved her job as being a mother. And she'd have all the house things to do, and we were very little, and so she'd be making beds and doing all these things, straightening up the house and doing it. And while she was doing that, we'd be out playing or something, and she'd be singing hymns the whole time she did her work.
Wow.
And I learned many hymns that I probably wouldn't have known because she sang some of them all the time. So I remember especially, I go to the garden each day while the dew is still on the roses, and the voice I hear calling on my ear, none other. Now I'm forgetting the words. But God discloses, and he walks with me, and he talks with me, and tells me I am his own. And the voice I hear calling on I've forgotten the last. Anyway.
Isn't that beautiful how those things stick in your head even from such a young age?
And every day a hymn comes in my mind now. And it's there all day long.
You gotta scratch the itch. You gotta sing it.
Right. I do. I mean, usually not when people are all around because they'd probably think I'd gone off. But
Well, that's fine.
yeah.
You've earned that right.
But that's what she did. And she went to ladies' things at church, and helped out there. But her family was it. And she was the world's greatest cook. Everybody that ate Annie's food.
This is what I've heard.
They all wanted to come. Now, my dad's favorite thing in the world was fishing. And he would, in the summer, he would take his fishing boat out and say, I've got to go catch meat for the freezer. And it would be perch. And so he would come back and freeze all these everybody in the whole family from Canada and the U.S. would come to our house, just show up on a Sunday, knowing that they might get a fish dinner. And I remember when Carol and I were older, we were in charge of the coleslaw and the things that we were going to have. But my mother was just the best cook. And I remember coming in from school and seeing homemade noodles on the table. And I'd think, I'm going to love dinner tonight. And you could just smell the things and you just knew. And I would say that my mom and dad's love story never ended. He absolutely adored my mother. And my mother put up with him all those years.
Was Grandpa Wilbur similar in personality to my Grandpa Dan? Were they?
Yes, I think they were.
Yeah.
Maybe Dan wouldn't think so, but my dad could be pretty gruff. I mean, when things went wrong at the printing company, and he was going to be losing a whole lot of money, and people were, he would get. But he was always worried about keeping his people safe. Because there was paper cutters and things around that could cause harm.
Dangerous industry.
And you would have people injured, but he always took care of them. And I'll say when he ran that business, his concern always was the employees. Because if he ever had a downturn and he would have to lay people off, he would almost cry because he just couldn't stand to not. When he died, I remember a man that I didn't even know came up to me at the funeral and said that my dad had saved him. And he told me, the story about how he employed him and everything when he was so down and out and got him going. But Dad also helped start the Cherry Street Mission, which is now a huge thing in Toledo.
Yep.
And it wasn't him alone. It was the church men from many churches that began that. And I remember him taking us one time to see that. And it was just one room place. I think they had cots in the back, but they would give hot food to the men that were out on the streets.
Yep.
And that is going today, and it's huge.
It's huge now.
Huge.
Yeah. It was first started on Cherry Street. I worked there for a couple of years, actually, before the recession, 2008.
Yeah.
And
it
now
started
it's
from
huge.
really
Now it's
nothing. Just these men would take turns going down and having services with the people off the street. And I think my dad wanted us to see how some people lived.
Yep.
And then you'd know what you had. Wow. And we would stay and hear the service then, too. But, church was, as we got to be teenagers, if you didn't get to church on Sunday morning, you could be sure you weren't going anywhere the next weekend at all. So we made it to church, and we were sliding in that pew very late some days.
Yeah.
Because it would be Carol, Dan, and I. Of course, Bill was too young at that time.
Right.
He would be going with them. And he'd laugh. He was already in the pew laughing at us when we'd be sliding in there. And they'd turn their head to acknowledge that we were there. But that's how it was. And those were the rules.
Was it, did you grow up in the Lutheran church?
No,
Or was
it was called United Brethren, which I would say is like Methodist, because we were baptized Methodist, because I think that was the church closest to where Mom and Dad were at the time. And even though Dad had a car, there wasn't. And my mother never drove. She did not drive. We never had a second car. My dad was so happy when I learned to drive. He had a car waiting for me so I could start doing the errands.
Yeah, he didn't want to keep toting everyone around.
Right. But then, back to the printing company, too. Everybody worked there, all of us at one time or another. And I know that my dad was so thrilled when Dan started to take interest. He went down there, and my dad didn't start him at the top of the company. Oh, no. You have to clean the bathrooms. You work your way up. He worked in the bindery doing different things. And then, of course, he worked his way into a printing press.
The bindery has been, I think Nathan worked in the bindery for a little bit. I think my dad got kind of started in a mid-level position. But yeah,
Oh, your dad, he came in at a high level compared to the rest.
Yeah. He he got the school treatment. He went in.
Right.
Yeah. So he had some business experience elsewhere, but I know the bindery is the famed starting point.
Starting point, yes. Oh, and there's lots of stories about the beginning bindery. I mean, there's a lot of stories.
Yeah.
But some of those, and everybody in our family worked there. Dad's sisters all worked in the bindery.
I pulled weeds there. I landscaped.
Oh, yeah. I don't think anybody avoided it as long as it was in the family, the company. And I know this was very late because I already had, the kids and they were partly grown up. And Dad and I had gone to the store together. And when we came back, I don't know how we got on the printing company, but he told me at that time how thrilled he was that his son had taken that business over. He couldn't have been happier about it, and that he could leave that in his hands, and he felt so good about it. And then, of course, after that, Dad had that stroke, and he couldn't speak anymore. But you knew when he was happy. And I remember them having to come from the print shop over to talk to Dad about things because he still had to sign things. And he understood. We didn't know if he understood, but he'd read the newspaper at night and see obituaries and cry because he knew the people. And so he would come over and he would explain. Dan would say, we need to get a loan for this or that or whatever the thing was. Oh, yes, he was so happy.
Wow.
As opposed to my mother, who never knew we made any money beyond that first press. And she used to say, well, we'll do that or get that when our ship comes in. So finally one day, Carol and I, and Dad would say to us, take your mother and get her some new clothes. Make her buy some new clothes. So we would take her and buy new clothes. Oh, she said, this is a lot of money. So finally when they came one time, it was after Dad was gone. And my mother saw the bottom line on something. And she said, oh, she said, do we have that much money? And the man said, yes, Mrs. Kane, you have that much money. You could eat steak every day if you'd like. And see, and so later I said to Mom, we kept telling you your ship came in and you just wouldn't accept it.
You never hoisted the sail.
She wouldn't do it. She
Well,
got a
that's a
little
good-
more lenient,
Yeah.
but then she had a reason because she could be helping us out.
Well, that's sweet. That's the way that it.
But that was how they both were. Yeah. They were different personalities. My mother never would say any kind of a bad word. And
Yeah.
my dad liked to use some bad words when he got mad. hmm And she would say, oh, Wilbur, you shouldn't talk like that.
Right. And what about the? We'll bounce back to your other kids because we got a little bit about.
Oh, we got to
Bob.
go back to, yes.
We got to get a little more about
Okay.
Tim and then Sue's, and then I have one more question for you, and then we'll
Okay.
kind of button it all up.
Okay, well, Tim, the kids all liked, I think, our school. But I started to notice that Tim was complaining a lot about the teachers he had. And I was in that same district. And I had gotten to know something about some of the teachers, and I thought, I don't know about these guys. I don't think they were putting their best foot forward. And, well, anyway, later on, we did get a superintendent who got rid of some of those. But Tim had picked them out.
But Tim was right.
He was absolutely right. These
bet-
people shouldn't have been there. They weren't teaching him anything. And he would argue with the teachers. And of course, they'd say, you get out of here, because they weren't putting up with that. Well, Tim found out about Hillsdale College sometime during, I think they probably came to the school, because they always come to talk to the kids. And so he came home one day and he was going to Hillsdale College. Well, by that time, Larry was there, his cousin. So he knew about Hillsdale from that. And he maybe had gone over to have a weekend or something with Larry. And so he was going to Hillsdale College, and that was just the end of it. And I said, well, I think you better apply to somewhere. What if you don't get in? This is it. Hillsdale College for me. So
And what
got
year did
into-
he start at? So he would have visited Larry at Hillsdale College in
Larry is
83,
6 years older.
84, something like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so Tim started Hillsdale College, and that changed his life. I have to say it.
Wow.
The professors were just outstanding. They took a liking to Tim. I remember one guy saying, this guy could have been a Rhodes Scholar if he had applied himself. But he did not have anyone that was motivating him at all. But he
Right.
certainly got motivated over there. And one reason he wanted to go there was because they had that internship. And in his junior year, he went to have an internship with a senator. And he got, toward the end of his time, he called and said, you know, I don't know if I want to go back to school. I think I want to just stay here. I said, oh, no, you don't. You come back and graduate. That's not permissible. And I said, I will promise you this. As soon as you graduate, you can go right back there. We'll have you on a plane the next week. And I kept my promise, and he
Good.
did come back. But today he still loves it and credits Hillsdale for his life, for what he's done.
Yeah.
Because he went there and just fit right in. And he didn't go there to make money. He went there because of what they were doing. And he became affiliated with this group that brought kids from third world countries, I mean, young people, and taught them about democracy and freedom, because most of them didn't have it where they were from. And then those
Interesting.
kids would stay there for a period of time, and he'd have to show them how we operate in this country. And I remember him saying, what should I do? He said, I'm running out of things. And I said, put them on that bus that takes them all over. They can get on and off and see all these things and point out some things that they should look at. And so anyway, I went a few times and I met a lot of these.
And where was
people.
this
He was living in D.C.
in DC? So they're doing like a bus tour of DC.
Yeah.
I see.
But he had other things because they were having meetings and talking about democracy and how it works and what you have to do to get your country there, about how we select our people that run things here. But I met a lot of these kids, and at one time, one of the guys that helped support this group, it was the Freedom Foundation, and one of these people that supported this group owned a home in Georgetown, and people kept breaking into it. It was a beautiful, huge place. And so he asked him if he would be willing to live there and just pay the utilities. Well, of course, Tim snapped that up in a minute. So he had this enormous house so we could have those kids come over there in the evenings. And when I'd be there, we would feed them, and because they didn't have much money.
Right.
Yeah. But anyway, he did stay with them a long time, and that got him started. But then, as one part of that thing, it led to when they were closing the military bases, because they didn't need so many anymore in this country. And so Tim would go, probably with a senator at that time or someone, to the town where it was going to be closed. And the people would be very fearful because that was going to spoil their economy. It was just going to devastate them.
Well, yeah.
So Tim helped a lot of them find new ways, because they would leave the base, a lot of the buildings and things on the base that they could use, the community could have. And I remember the last one he did was in Texas. And by that time, he pretty much knew how to do this. And they decided to turn the parts that they'd give them into a junior college. And so the
Interesting.
community was going to have all this given to them, and they would be able to start pretty far ahead with that. And the people were so thrilled when they wanted him to come back, because they were opening this then, and they wanted him to come. And he had no idea when he got there that they put him in the parade. He was leading the parade. They were so happy. So, of course, then he got into more of that kind of thing,
Right.
and joined a firm that did things like that all the time. And that's how he got to be a lobbyist.
Well, in the not too distant future, I look forward to sitting down with Tim and then collecting. He's got a fun portfolio of stories as well.
Oh, he does. Oh my gosh, oh. Well, I'll let him tell those, because I heard a lot of them when he was at the level that Will is doing these internships.
Oh yeah.
Oh my gosh, yes.
It was a different time then too.
It was a very different time. Yeah.
80s.
But Susan, she wanted to go to Hillsdale, but I thought Tim would kind of take her over because she went for one weekend and he wouldn't let guys even near her. So I said, I don't think you want to go to school where Tim's at, because that's what he'll do.
Right.
So she went off to college to Wittenberg, and she met a lot of good friends that she still has today. And she still likes that school, but she said she could even in those days see it changing.
The university culture.
But again, she was her brother's sister, and so she would argue with the professors too at Wittenberg.
Well, hopefully in those days it wouldn't reflect poorly on your grades.
No. Well, there was one guy that wasn't fond of her.
Yeah.
Because of her attitude, I think.
Yeah. That's funny.
He probably found out later that she was right. And then Bob, now Bob was our one. We could not find where he wanted to go. So we went up to Ferris State College. And unfortunately, toward the end of the year, he got his hand smashed. They had to share a bathroom with the other side. And he was standing there, and I'm sure they'd had beer. And he was standing there, and the guy on the other side shut the door on his hand and smashed it. So we had to go in the middle of the night and bring Bob home. And I wanted him to
Was
go.
he playing baseball there, or was that?
No, he was just going to
Okay.
school
Yeah.
there. And Ferris State has almost anything you can think of that's a really. Well, the one time we lived next door to a guy who had gone to school to become an orthodontist. Not an orthodontist, ocular. And
Optometrist.
yeah, but you didn't have to become. It wasn't for doctors. It was for the guys that would be of the lesser job. And they even had people that learned how to survey from airplanes. I mean, it was odd stuff that they had.
A lot
at
of
that school.
vocational.
And I think that appealed to Bob, and he hadn't decided what it was going to be.
Okay.
But then he said, "Well, it's so far from home. I'd rather be going to Central." Well, we let him go to Central, and he would show up every weekend. And we knew that wasn't going to be good. So we finally said, well, there's no sense in making him go because he's not going to do it. Well, all in all, he ended up being a painter, and he was a good painter. And so everybody in our family says we'll never forget Bob because all the rooms in our house have been painted by him.
Yeah.
And that's true here, too.
That's good work.
And he had all this painting equipment, and he would travel. He would go to other cities.
Yeah.
He went and lived with Susan and painted down in Baton Rouge.
He's been a lot of places in the U.S. Yeah. He's been all over, up and down the eastern.
Yes.
And probably out to Colorado, maybe even a time or two.
Oh, yeah. He's been out there. I don't know if he painted out there.
Oh, okay.
I'm not sure about that, but just about everywhere else.
Yeah.
Certainly down in Florida.
Yeah.
He's been painting down there. But he did first go down there to paint on his own. So, I mean, that was one of the first places he did go then. But then when he ended up coming back here toward the end, he painted for everybody in Toledo
Yeah.
and other people. A lot of people knew about his painting, and they would be looking for him. But, well, we didn't talk about the grandkids or anything because,
Oh, well, that's
yeah.
to be continued.
Oh, okay.
Jury's out on them still, right?
Well, it is. Tim has,
Why don't you run through the numbers? How many your grandchildren?
well, there aren't that many. There's only
Carl.
5.
Yeah. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, 5.
Yeah. And Bob didn't ever get married. So we didn't have any grandchildren from Bob, unfortunately. Because now I mentioned about his being a good ball player. And that's one of the things that Tim's boys remember of him playing ball and everything with them.
Oh, yeah.
Because Tim wasn't a ball player. He really wasn't interested in that. But all those things those kids like, especially Will.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
So he and Bob were great buddies because they liked the same things. When there would be football and different sports on TV, they'd be on the phone with each other for every play.
That's a special memory for
right. And
Will.
then, of course, Carlin got in the family, and she joined right in with everything.
Yep.
And so now these kids are all older, and they're all heading out for what they're going to do with their life.
Yeah, that's special to watch.
Right.
Yeah. And what are the ages and whose children are they?
Okay, 3. Tim. There's Tim Jr., and he is a junior in college. And then there's Carlin, and that's Susan's daughter, and she's be a senior this year in college. And then Will, who will be starting college, and he's got a senior year in high school, and then he'll start college. And then the girls, Noelle and Jordan, are 16 and 15, and they are something. The youngest one will probably be president one year. She's something to behold, and Noelle, of course, is gorgeous, but they all have their own things.
Yeah.
But Jordan is fearless.
Cool. Good.
And Timmy loves what he's doing, and he's not too much longer in school, and I think he'll be raring to go. They've all done internships, so it's helped a lot.
That's important. Yeah.
Yeah.
You get too much of that academic practice.
Carling is in D.C. living with them right now.
Oh, is she?
Yeah, and she's interning at Congress.
Oh, that's good. Yeah. Well,
Now, I don't know
There's-
what
we didn't really miss much. We kind of got back to you from your family tree, and then we saw your family tree growing from you and Uncle Dick.
Yeah.
That's special. There's a few questions that I like to ask everyone. One of them is about food, and you already talked about it. I love.
we love food.
It's the memories associated with food.
Food is a big deal, I think, with every single family. I
The-
don't know anybody that not interested in food.
Always.
Tim's kids are becoming foodies also, and Tim,
I've
Timmy, the oldest.
Yeah.
Well, if you had one of his meals, it's wonderful. So he's not taking that in school, but I think it'll always be part of whatever he does. And of course, Will's gotten all interested, and I've let him cook all the time he's been here. And the girls, we have contests sometimes over at their house. And I usually take one, Charles and Tim takes one. And we divide up the kids, and we let Linda be the gopher, like she has to tell us where things are. And we do the same meal, and then we see who's the best.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That sounds fun. It sounds
It
like a
is.
cooking show.
But then we also, we don't always have a contest, but we take turns.
And last question. Can you remember a time where you laughed so hard that you were just, brought to tears, or, a particularly hilarious episode? Sometimes people can't think of one off the top of their head.
Oh, wow. Yeah, just think of.
And if not, we can just chop this part out. It doesn't really matter. By the way, the ambiance with the coffee making and the doors opening and close are a lovely cameo by Danny Scharf, talking about a family together and hustle and bustle and people still bumping elbows all day. So I am happy to leave that in because I think it will be a fun association.
It's my life.
That's it.
Yeah.
You're running a sweet little hotel here.
Oh, I know. It's people comment on that all the time. I have a friend. I have some very wonderful friends. I have girls that are called the Jolly Girls that I've played bridge with for over 35 years.
Wow.
And every one of them is every one of these women are wonderful, wonderful women. And then I have some friends that are the same that I keep in touch with all the time. One of them is not doing so well now, and I want to go see her. But she always says to me, Pat, I've never met in my life anyone that has as much family as you do.
I think that's a great place to leave it off.
Yeah.
That's a good quote.
Yeah, probably some of the laughing was some of the things that happened with me in school with kids.
Yeah.
Yeah.
While teaching or being?
No, ball teaching, yeah. There were a lot of things that.
Well, kids bring a lot of joy.
Oh, they do. Yes. And kids are funny.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
They make me laugh every day when
I
I'm with
recommend
them.
kids.
I highly recommend kids.
I do. I do. If you get too full of yourself, just go see some kids. And Teddy right now cracks me up.
Yeah.
I can't stop.
That kid's got a funny way of talking about the world.
I cannot wait to see what happens with Teddy. And some people I think you get that way about. And Teddy's one of them, and then Jordan's the one in my.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not the favorites.
No, not a favorite. Oh, no, they're not a favorite. It's just like, sometimes you can see kind of the path kids are going.
Funny connections.
But you just can't figure out where that's going to go.
It's interesting, too, to watch.
And our Tim was that way.
Yeah.
He was that way.
Yeah. You see how...
I honestly had no clue where he would go because there were days when I opened the door and said, here's your stuff, and slammed the door.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's
Yeah.
I understand, though. Not favorites, but outliers.
Yeah.
Sylvia, my
Well,
daughter,
yeah.
she's got
And
that.
then you think, this kid isn't going to make it sometimes. They're not doing this or they're not doing
This
that.
kid's going to change the world or they're not going to live long enough to see it.
Well, I couldn't have been more wrong about that, that's for sure. But finally, when I look at some kids that are a little over here, they're not with the group,
Yeah.
so to speak.
Yeah.
and you think, where are they going to be?
What are you gonna
And that's what I want to live long enough to see what happens to Jordan.
Yeah. Well,
Might not make it.
you'll see some things. I know that.
Yeah, I'll see
Just
something.
from my few interactions with that
Yeah.
young lady.
She was like that to start school.
Yeah.
She's always like that. So.
Well, sometimes the quiet ones off in the edge of the room
She's not quiet.
Well, the other outliers change the world with their ideas too.
Well,
you know,
Teddy's
and
not quiet either. You know Teddy right away.
I'm thinking of like,
Oh, Sylvia, you think?
well, Sylvia's out there, but Emerson is quiet, but he's, my
Oh,
son,
Emerson.
one of the most observant,
Emerson will do something big.
odd people.
Yeah.
He just sees the world differently. It's just,
Oh, I
Interesting.
remember Emerson from when he was so little with those eyes, those big blue eyes, and he would just watch things.
yeah. That's a big, big family. A lot of
Who
different.
always talks about him is Shirley, because she
Oh, really?
remembered seeing him when he was so little with those
Oh,
big
sweet
blue
Shirley.
eyes. And I think it was a shower or something, and she couldn't get over him. She just thought he was so gorgeous and he was so fun.
He's becoming a handsome fellow
Oh,
now.
I'm sure the girls will like him.
Well, we'll keep that last part in and make him listen to it so he gets all embarrassed.
I know somebody that was kind of like him.
Oh yeah, you don't say. That's good. Is there anything that you would wish to share with, that those who might be listening, a little nugget of wisdom or a pearl that the Lord has given you in your years?
Well, I need the Lord every day.
Mm.
I will say that. And if you don't know the Lord, I think I would recommend you do. Because I don't know that I would be where I am or even here if I didn't. And I did start when I was very, very young. And of course you have to credit your folks because they're the one that took you.
Yep.
And I remember getting up and singing and making the other Carol and Dan do the same thing with me. They didn't have a choice. We'd get up at all the Christmas stuff and everything and sing because I was brave. They weren't, but they didn't want anything to do with it maybe. But that was part of our life. And it does you well many times in your life if you know the Lord.
Well, it's certainly been special to have you as an anchor for our family, to be hosting things here, to have that foundation. And I know that the Lord has carried you through a rough couple of years. And I'm just really grateful for the opportunity to do this.
Well, I know they're in heaven
Absolutely.
with the Lord. And I wasn't sure they were always on the page, but they got there.
Yeah.